Did I mention we have thousands of playlists and the largest collection of podcasts to enjoy, all for free?
All you need to do is download the free iHeartRadio app now and discover music, radio, and podcasts you're going to love. Portions of the following program were pre-recorded.
KIOI San Francisco. This is Star 1013's Community 101.
Welcome to iHeartRadio Communities, a public affairs special focusing on the biggest issues impacting you this week. Here's Ryan Gorman.
Thanks for joining us here on iHeartRadio Communities. I'm Ryan Gorman, and we have some important conversations lined up for you. In a moment, I'll get some answers for you about the COVID-19 vaccines from a top official at the FDA. Then I'll be joined by travel reporter Peter Greenberg, who's going to break down some key tips on navigating summer travel amid chaos in the air and inflation on the ground. Right now, to get things started, I'm joined by Dr. Peter Marks, Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research for the Food and Drug Administration. Dr. Marks, great to talk to you again. And the first thing I want to touch on is more of a big picture question. Why is it important to get a COVID-19 booster if you're already fully vaccinated?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me today. You know, COVID-19 is evolving remarkably rapidly. Just in the past 6 weeks, the BA.5 variant, which was barely present before June, has now become dominant. And so a vaccine that worked really well, the original virus strain that first started circulating way back when, around in the early 2020 period, this is now very different. So that vaccine works very differently against what we now have circulating versus what it would have done back then. So really a booster will renew protection against the potentially COVID-19 during a time of high risk because of waning immunity, new variants that are circulating, like move into the winter months again, we'll be back indoors, and that's when respiratory viruses become a problem. So I think people who have been vaccinated previously, they'll want to consider making sure they get boosters when it's appropriate for them to do so, so they keep up with their protection against the serious outcomes, in particular from COVID-19.
When you say these COVID-19 booster shots are a bit different from the initial vaccines that were originally rolled out, what exactly does that mean?
So the boosters that we're contemplating rolling out this fall will be updated to target the Omicron variants that have come. And that's because we're leaning in to try to help best protect people in the country by ensuring that we have safe and effective updated vaccines that will target variants. So conversation that took place at our recent advisory committee meeting and the data that we looked over has led us to realize that we really want to make sure that we can cover the Omicron variants that are circulating most recently now, which is BA4 and BA.5, as well as other possible variants that might circulate. And to do so, we'll update the vaccine so that it'll probably be a two-component vaccine that contains some of the original, half of the original vaccine. Half will be targeted against these newer Omicron variants. And we'll be leveraging the safety and effectiveness information that we have from the manufacturers in order to make these new booster vaccines available in a very timely manner so that they'll be available by the early fall time frame.
I'm Ryan Gorman, joined by Dr. Peter Marks, Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the Food and Drug Administration. Is this something you see each year? Version of the COVID-19 vaccine, or this is just one that's needed because of what we've experienced with the Omicron variants?
Yeah, it's a little early to say whether this is going to be a yearly event or not. It is possible it could be, because I think we may have COVID-19 around to stay, but it will very certainly be necessary this fall because of the shift that has occurred.
Does the FDA anticipate any new groups being
eligible for an additional booster. And we also are not going to forget children, and so we'll be carefully considering whether and when to authorize booster shots. So no decision reached yet, but certainly keeping in mind that we need to try to protect the entire spectrum of the population in terms of age range.
And this might be a good time to run through for a moment the current guidelines, the current recommendations, because I know they have changed and adjusted over time. Where are we at right now in terms of who should be vaccinated, who should have received a booster? Can you fill us in on that?
So if you're alive in the United States and older than 6 months old, you should be vaccinated unless you have some medical contraindication to vaccination. So basically, vaccination is a really good idea because we know that if you're vaccinated, you significantly reduce your risk of hospitalization or death from COVID-19. Let me try to simplify things, though, for adults who are otherwise healthy and who have had their first vaccine a year or more ago. In other words, their primary vaccination a year or more ago. So the way I can simplify that is, first of all, if you haven't had a booster at all, you should go get a booster. And I would do that if you've only had 2 doses of an mRNA vaccine. It's perfectly fine to go right now to get a booster because you'll be able to still get one in the fall. If you have had 3 doses of a vaccine, then if you're less than 50, you're good to go. If you're older than 50, you're eligible for a 4th dose, and you can go get that now. Again, it won't prevent you from getting a booster in the fall. And finally, if you're immunocompromised or if you see a healthcare provider for a chronic medical condition, you should really speak to that healthcare provider about whether or not you should be getting boosted, because in some cases, for some conditions, you might be eligible for an extra vaccine in order to try to help give an extra boost to your immune system.
I'm Ryan Gorman, joined by Dr. Peter Marks, Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the Food and Drug Administration. If someone has recently been infected with COVID-19, and we know it's still going around across the country, when should that person get a booster shot if they haven't already gotten one?
Right, so there's no need to run out immediately after having had COVID-19 recently to get a booster. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends that one consider getting a booster if eligible 3 months after having had COVID-19. But I'll say this, that as we work with our colleagues at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, these recommendations will probably be updated as we roll out boosters with the new composition in the fall. So stay tuned to see if these change. And again, if you have any questions about the timing of when you should get a booster after you've had COVID-19, talk to your healthcare provider.
I know one question I often get about all of this, especially with people trying to make plans for the summer. Once I receive a booster shot, when am I considered fully vaccinated? When does it really kick in to offer that protection that I'm expecting to get?
Yeah, great question that we actually know something about. So it's nice to have it. Usually it takes about 7 to 10 days to really have the boosting response kick in. And so probably starting a week after, but certainly 1 to 2 weeks after, you're really getting to that peak, towards the peak of the immune response, so that you'll have a really, by about 2 weeks after the time you booster, you're now starting to get towards the peak of the response you'll have to the booster. Sometimes it even goes up after that, but you get a really nice boost usually within that 1 to 2 week period.
Let's talk about children 5 and older for a moment. Do they need boosters if their potential for a severe outcome from COVID is relatively
So the issue of younger children, ages 5 and above, there's a lot of back and forth about the risk in terms of serious outcomes. But there still are enough serious outcomes in that age range, and there are also, unfortunately, we're seeing the same type of long COVID effects that we can see in adults. We're sometimes seeing those in kids. So if appropriate and offered, it's not unreasonable to have young children in that 5 and up age range get a booster at the appropriate time, and it's something that we will be carefully considering in terms of our recommendations that we make for this fall.
Do you have any guidance to share for those who are eligible for boosters now, but who are a little bit confused about when they should receive one?
So the best advice is, right, if you are under 50, it's pretty simple. If you've had 3 vaccine doses of an mRNA vaccine, that would be either the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines, you are, for the moment, up to date. If you're 50 and up and you've had 4 doses, you're up to date. If you have some confusion because you can't recall what vaccines you got, or you might have gotten the Janssen vaccine or something, I would just ask your healthcare provider. Just call them up and ask them and figure out whether it's time for you to go get a booster.
I'm Ryan Gorman, joined by Dr. Peter Marks, Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the Food and Drug Administration. I know a lot of parents, they have questions about the vaccines for children under the age of 5. What can you tell us about those specific vaccines?
So the vaccines for children under 5 were very well studied. We were very careful about looking over the data. We do believe that the authorized vaccines are going to help prevent serious outcomes. They'll also reduce some of the less serious outcomes as well. They did show, they were shown in studies to be very safe, and we have no concerns about long-term side effects from them. So we really would encourage parents to consider vaccinating their children that are 6 months to 5 years of age, because they can help prevent the serious outcomes from COVID-19 that we simply don't want to see. And I think you already alluded to this, that yes, it's true that serious outcomes in young children are much less common than in older adults. However, any death or any hospitalization in a child that could be avoided by a vaccine, it's one too many, because it just creates a hole in people's lives.
Do we have any information on how these vaccines potentially impact things like long COVID or just transmission of the virus?
So we have information on both, and there's good news and some news that, well, it's just news. So let's start with this. In terms of transmission, the vaccines, the original vaccine reduced transmission when we had the original strain circulating by about 60 to 70%. Probably we have data on that. Unfortunately, with these newer variants, that benefit has largely gone away. And the hope is that with our modified vaccine composition, we'll bring some of that back, that protection against transmission. Now, on the good news side of things, we do know that if you are fully vaccinated, and particularly those people who have had 3 doses or more of vaccine, the risk of long COVID is significantly lower. It's at least 50% lower, if not lower than that, if you do end up getting COVID-19. Some studies have shown that it's even 3 or 4-fold reduced. So getting vaccinated helps prevent that possibility of long COVID. And
Dr. Peter Marks, Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the Food and Drug Administration. Dr. Marks, we really appreciate the time and insight and expertise. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, I'm Ryan Gorman here on iHeartRadio Communities, and joining me now, I have journalist, reporter, and travel editor Peter Greenberg with some summer travel tips. Peter, really appreciate you checking in with us. And of course, we have to start with some of the air travel chaos we've been experiencing recently. What is happening with all of these flight delays and cancellations, and why?
The perfect storm. It's not any one reason. We've heard, of course, about the pilot shortages. That's just one component part. We're talking about the people who work frontally, the ground handlers, the baggage loaders. They're understaffed as well. Then you have the TSA. They're understaffed. You have air traffic control center. They're understaffed. And we haven't even brought in weather. In addition to that, let's go back to 2021 when the airlines were doing early buyout packages for a lot of their employees. They expected maybe 4% to take them. A lot more did. And then travel came even roaring back last year at the very moment that the airlines saw demand start to exponentially increase. And they did what most airlines do when that happens. They tried to support that, meaning let's add routes, let's add flights. I'll give you an example. In a given year prior to the pandemic, how many new routes in a given year did Southwest Airlines add? Believe it or not, it was only about one. Last year it was like 33.
Wow.
JetBlue added 29. And the scheduling people clearly were not talking to the operations people because they obviously did not have the people to physically fly the plane and work the ground. And so one by one, we dealt with overscheduled and understaffed airlines in an environment where then when you threw in weather, it became Armageddon. And it stayed that way from May of last year. And it'll probably stay that way through the middle of September this year.
And so I think the big question on the minds of those listening right now who are planning trips and are going to have to utilize air travel, what can they do to prepare themselves for these potential disruptions and maybe even protect themselves against them?
Well, I would not go far to say you're going to protect yourself against the abuse. The abuse is almost inevitable based on the sheer mathematics of it. However, if you're like me, you don't travel because you want to travel. You travel because you actually really need to travel. It's part of our cultural DNA. So if you're ready to put up with the abuse, then here's some advice. One piece of advice I'll give you is not going to sound relatively new, but guess what? It's not. But I'm going to add a wrinkle to it. The piece of advice I'm going to share is you want to fly out the first flight of the day. Nothing new there. However, here's the wrinkle. Fly out of the first flight of the day from an airport where the airline is not based and where there's no crew base for that airport. And the reason for that is there's every reason to believe that the plane that you're on will have come in the night before and overnighted along with the crew. And the crew will stay with the plane. So the next morning at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., you're not waiting for a plane and you're not waiting for a crew. You'll get out. That's one thing to approach.
If things go wrong with the flight, what can consumers expect as compensation for that disruption, or can they expect nothing at all?
It all depends on how you define the word nothing, and I'm not trying to be cavalier about it. The U.S. doesn't really provide, as a federal mandate, a really good scheduled compensation for people whose flights are delayed or canceled, except if your flight is outright canceled, then you're entitled under the U.S. Department of Transportation to an immediate refund of what you paid for that ticket back to your original form of payment, even if you bought a so-called non-refundable ticket. So at least your money's protected. It doesn't go into some bad gift card or voucher. That should be airline cancel. If you cancel, there is some good news.